Shane Warne was many things: a genius, a provocateur, a tabloid regular, and a once-in-a-lifetime sporting phenomenon. He wasn't just a cricketer, he was a paradox, a headline, a spectacle. He bowled like a man with the keys to the universe and lived like one with none of its maps. A legend on the field, he was equally legendary off it, carving a career as extraordinary as it was chaotic. His death in 2022 at just 52 left a void in cricket and beyond.
Slightly unorthodox fashion off the back of Trescothick's bat.
But Warne's story remains one of sport's most riveting sagas. Warne emerged in the 1990s, the heyday of gritty cricket matches and even grittier moustaches. He swaggered onto the scene with bleached hair and an almost absurd confidence for someone who, by his own admission, was a pretty ordinary cricketer growing up. His first delivery in an Ashes series, a ball so devilish it was christened the ball of the century, is burned into cricketing folklore.
First ball in Test cricket in England for Shane Warne. And he's done it!
England's Mike Gatting, the victim of that legendary leg break,
Kenny Palmer just gave him a raised eyebrow.
Looked as though someone had stolen his lunch. "I don't know how you play that," Gatting later said, a sentiment shared by hundreds of batters who followed.
Oh, yes.
To watch Warne bowl was to witness a masterclass in psychological warfare. He didn't just bowl, he bewitched. He stood at the top of his mark with a mischievous grin, tossing the ball between his hands like a conjurer preparing his trick. The delivery itself was almost incidental. The drama was in the setup. He stared down batters with the bravado of someone who knew he'd already won. "I don't just try to get them out," Warne explained. "I want to embarrass them." And he did, again and again. By the end of his career, Warne had taken 708 Test wickets, more than anyone before him. He could spin the ball on a sixpence and seemed to have an extrasensory understanding of the game. Warne wasn't just a bowler, he was cricket's great disruptor, a player who reinvented leg spin in an era dominated by fast bowlers. His impact on the sport is almost incalculable, though cricket historian Gideon Hay came close, describing him as a revolution wrapped in peroxide. But if Warne's on-field genius was undeniable, his off-field life was a soap opera. Where do we begin? Perhaps with the drugs. In 2003, Warne was banned for a year after testing positive for a banned diuretic, moduretic, which he insisted had been given to him by his mother. "She thought it'd make me look a bit slimmer," he explained, an excuse so disarmingly honest it sounded almost plausible. But the rules were the rules, and Warne spent the next year in exile, a period he later described as the longest of my life. The drug scandal was a watershed moment, though hardly the end of Warne's extracurricular dramas. In 1994, he and teammate Mark Waugh were fined for accepting money from an Indian bookmaker in exchange for pitch and weather information, a controversy that only came to light 4 years later. "We were naive," Warne admitted, though critics were less charitable. For many, it was another example of Warne's propensity for trouble, a trait that would follow him throughout his career. And then there was his personal life, a whirlwind of lurid headlines and improbable reconciliations. Warne's marriage to Simone Callahan fell apart under the weight of his serial infidelity, though the pair maintained a surprisingly amicable relationship post-divorce. "We were always best friends," Simone said after Warne's death, a reminder that even in his messiest moments, he was never wholly unlikable. Warne's love life became a tabloid staple, his name linked to an ever-growing list of women, from British models to Hollywood actresses. He was once caught sending flirtatious messages to an English nurse while on a date with someone else. "I was just being friendly," Warne insisted, though the press gleefully begged to differ. He became a caricature of himself, a man whose private life was seemingly allergic to privacy. Asked about his escapades, Warne responded with a shrug. "What can I say? I like women, and they like me." This was Warne in a nutshell, unrepentant, unapologetic, and utterly authentic. In an era of meticulously polished public figures, he was refreshingly real, even when that reality was messy. He smoked, he drank, he gambled. He once skipped a team meeting to eat a pizza in his hotel room. "I'm just a bloke from the suburbs who loves cricket," he often said, though that hardly did justice to the scale of his influence, or his contradictions. Despite his controversies, Warne was a man of extraordinary charisma. His commentary after retiring from cricket was as entertaining as his bowling, a mix of insight, banter, and occasionally baffling anecdotes. He was a staple of poker tournaments, reality TV shows, and even a much-discussed foray into fashion. Warne seemed to exist in a constant state of reinvention, a man who refused to be defined by any single chapter of his life. His death, sudden and devastating, felt like the loss of a friend to millions who had never met him. Found unresponsive in a villa in Thailand, Warne's passing at 52 was attributed to natural causes, though it hardly seemed natural for someone so full of life to be gone. Tributes poured in from across the globe, a testament to his universal appeal. Sachin Tendulkar called him,
"You want to be there inside the stadium when he's bowling."
a fierce competitor and a friend, while Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison described him as a character larger than life. But perhaps the most poignant tributes came from Warne's family, who spoke of a man who was, above all, devoted to his children. "He may have been a cricketing legend to the world, but to us, he was just Dad," said his son Jackson, a reminder that behind the headlines and the heroics was a man as human as any of us. Warne's legacy is complicated, as all the best ones are. He was a genius and a rogue, a man who could make the ball talk, but couldn't always keep his life in order. He was flawed, but those flaws only made him more compelling. "I've made mistakes, and I'll probably make more," Warne once said, "but I've always been true to myself." And that, in the end, is Shane Warne, a cricketer who bowled like a sorcerer, lived like a rock star, and left the world with more stories than it knows what to do with.